and I'm going to George. I'm sorry. Oh God, that's a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot. Oh, hey. Thank you. For the rest of you, it's on Amazon. Anyway, sorry, Jarod. I was just doing some DTrace adoption.
No worries. Get the crowd pumped up, right?
They're always excited.
So basically, I've been using DTrace. It helped refresh my memory. I was that time of my life got a little hazy from the company that shall not be named. Do you remember when I got the first bits?
It's before 43, right? So it's got to be. It's 2002.
Had to be early 2002, I think.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I've been using DTrace since about 2002, and running it on systems at a corporation since about 2002. And then obviously it was released in 2005, and then basically working at consultancy, ASIS right now, where we do a tremendous amount of performance work on business critical systems, looking at performance problems. And DTrace has been integral to that. So easily, this has been a main focus of what I do on a day-to-day basis for 7 years. I stopped counting in the mid-200s at distinct companies that I'd visited. So, if you have a bank that has several divisions, retail and investment or whatever, that's lumped together as one. I gave up after about 250 or so. So I have no idea what it is right now. The problem is of those 250 companies, the number of them that have anybody, they could have 1,000 Solaris systems, right? Being back in the time or whatever now. The number of people internally that actually use DTrace, even on a yearly basis, once a year, can easily be counted on a single hand. We're talking about extremely bright people. So the question becomes why is there not more people here, and why after 7 years of being released is there no adoption? The biggest thing that we hear is people talking about sort of some barriers to entry. There's a lot of talk about, potentially there's the syntax that scares them off. I don't believe that personally. I think that there are other issues, and we talked about one a little bit earlier, and I'd like to go through a few of them, but this is something that we have to fix because this is probably one of the few events that you go to where 98% of the user base is either in the room or watching the Ustream. There's very few people that would use DTrace even on a weekly basis that aren't here right now, which is very unfortunate because obviously it would be tremendously beneficial. And in a number of the things that we've talked about, for instance, will all Linux distributions adopt DTrace? Well, the interesting thing there is if one has it, and before if we were comparing apples and oranges, Linux and Solaris for a particular feature, say DTrace, because we had a lot of customers that were Linux in production that still wanted the benefit of DTrace, so they had one Solaris box stashed over the side and would move their Java applications over. We do performance analysis there and then throw it back into production, and that was extremely beneficial. Well, now if you have Linux distribution that has DTrace in it and we're using that and you find that you like it more, it's friendlier to you, now you can use it in production, there'll be adoption. But that clearly has not happened because in 7 years we don't have a very large user base. So some of the things is we talk a lot about syntactic sugar, and there seems to be some resistance to wanting to do this, so maybe we do like syntactic stevia, sort of 0 calorie kind of implementation. But there are a few things, and I'll use the copying example as one. Copying does throw a lot of people off. I don't know how many times we've seen it on DTrace discussed, or I've heard about people saying, I don't understand why the script works, why is this not working, right? And that's bad in and of itself, but it's also worse in that if somebody figures out how to use copy in finally, and then they do like syscall reentry, and they do a copy in, and you still get an error because that address space has not been faulted yet. So even though you finally learned how to use copy in, and then all of a sudden it breaks again, right? And so you have to now save, R whatever, R1, and then in read return, that's when you can actually do the copy in and dump out whatever it is that you wanted. So we have a problem in that not only does it take people a while to learn things, but then there are certain scenarios in which after they've learned it, it still breaks and they get frustrated. The other thing is sort of commonly used patterns, if you want to call them that. For instance, I don't know how many people have actually written the script, syscall, colon, whatever, entry, self-ts equals timestamp, return, test self-ts in the predicate, blah, 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 quantize, and then self-ts equals 0. I don't know how many times that's been written. And just as a side note, I checked on my laptop, I have 5 .d files. So I have 5 D scripts that I've actually kept, not counting the toolkit, not counting anything shipped on Mac OS. So I have 5 DTrace scripts after 11 years of doing this, 10 years of doing this. The reason for that is every customer that I go to, if I want to give them something to install, then it has to be vetted and it's change controlled and everything else, but if you do it in situ, it's not. So I have no idea, in all honesty, how many times I've written that. that particular paradigm. So the question is there a way that we can take a few of these, and the subroutine discussion is probably one where this can be had, to make it easier for people to be able to implement these things, right? So if it's easy to say, time of function, and we're hiding that, that's one way.
So, Jarod, can I ask you just on that? I mean, I kind of view the toolkit is the better vector for some of that stuff, because the toolkit gives you that higher level tool that helps you. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. I mean, I've written the same script, obviously, thousands of times. But it also has occurred to me while writing that it can't quite be refactored out. I mean, I think we can do some things to make it easier. Should we be focusing more on kind of these scripts that are at a slightly higher level? Or, I mean, do we?
Well, there's two things with the DTrace toolkit. One is that most people will run them, but never actually either understand the script itself, and more importantly, understand the output. So it's foreign to them. So that when they run it, it's sort of non-interesting because they're not forced to look at the code and understand what's really happening. They just run the scripts and they try to look at the output. So they understand a few of IOSnoop, for instance, is a very easy one to understand, right? Some of the others, not so much. The other thing is that DTrace toolkit is almost exclusively for the system itself, for the OS. There's almost nothing that involves applications. No Java really, be it C or be it any other language. There's really no emphasis on that. So the other problem that we have is you've got system administrators two things. System administrators that by default are the only ones that have the privileges to run DTrace, and so they would have to grant those to developers. Developers tend to understand DTrace and can pick up the language very easily, and more importantly, understand the output, which is the second thing for system administrators. A lot of the output, including stacks and things like that, are very foreign to them. And the problem is there's always been sort of a little war between those two communities, that the system administrators, if there's a privilege that they have to give to someone else, they're not going to want to. And so developers there are, out of the Fortune 1000 companies, there are handfuls at best where developers actually have DTrace privileges. So even though they would be the better community to run to use DTrace, they're prevented from being able to.
It seems like that might be the biggest barrier to entry, right?
That is a huge one. That is a huge one, yes.
Yeah. We might be partially addressing that in terms of the DevOps community, because the one thing about the DevOps community is you've got a reasonable crossover between those two foundational kind of elements. So I appreciate in the Fortune 100 companies, definitely that is the case, but the upcoming kind of web market and those sorts of things.
No, that's going to take time, though.
It's going to take time, I'm not saying it won't, but that's definitely on the way. So we're going to see those kind of movements push into the Fortune 100s as well. Because we're definitely seeing changes in the Fortune 100s to adhere to the DevOps type movement. Sure.
Hopefully.
I mean, there have been people for the last 15 years that have had developers with root access on production systems in the Global 2000, right? So now we've branded it with a name, and we've gotten people to talk about it louder, but I don't think there are any more people, right? Now that we've just given the same people a voice.
Fully agree with that.
Yeah.
So it's the latest kind of whiz-bang term.
Well, and within those 15 years, we've had a lot of other changes too, especially like the financial markets with Sarbanes-Oxley and all these other things where all of that has been ripped away. And so now, if you ask for a privilege to do something that you can't, almost universally denied. It's denied. There's a bot that just denied. Which is the comment we used to make about Sun Legal. It was just a Perl script. Adam and I just doing the Java 1 presentations. It was hilarious what they would do to presentations. So.
Are you talking about Java Technology 1?
Yeah, whatever it's called. So anyway, so it's sort of been disheartening a little bit to not see greater adoption. I mean, if you'd asked me in even 2004 when I was doing a lot of this on Wall Street, what the adoption would have been, just based on conversations that I was having with these companies that we were giving preview bits to, a tremendous amount of excitement, and there still is excitement. You still show people stuff and they get excited, but nobody is driven to learn, and that's the thing. I mean, I've tried, and I don't fully understand it, so that's the question, is what can we do as a community to try to improve that adoption? Because it's great to sit here and talk amongst ourselves and say this would be really cool and I'll use it for sure, but then if nobody outside of this room ever uses it, it's not nearly as much fun. And I'm tired of solving the same simple problems over and over and over. Not the exact same ones, but similar ones. So the more people are using DTrace, the harder the problems become, and that's more interesting. And so interesting is always good.
So one of the things I've noticed is that I think the greatest kind of single act for the accessibility of DTrace is the port to Apple. And I thought it was very interesting. Brendan has got this blog post of the top 10 D scripts on Mac OS X, and it kind of keeps researching in interest. as people we discover it, and it seems like that's a vector that we could be using better on, and whether, I don't know what the right vector is, but I think that whether it's, videos or, because what we're really talking about is online education, right? I mean, I think that one of the things, or I guess the question I would ask is what we're up against seems to me to be a lack of curiosity, a lack of understanding of the way the system works, things that are much bigger than here's a tool and how to use it.
I don't think it's, I honestly don't think it's curiosity. I think what you have is a simple function of volume, right?
But it's on your laptop.
Well, volume equals visibility, because I think you're exactly right. But I think the single biggest thing that you did to up-level visibility was get an OS X. But the difficulty is that the people who are intensely interested in Solaris, or Solaris variants performance, are in this room, right? Or just a couple hundred, a couple thousand, whatever it is, elsewhere. So to me, the best thing that you can do, to increase adoption, increase in visibility, increase, not visibility, I shouldn't say visibility, increase sort of interest is basically get it on as many platforms as you can. So the Linux talk I thought was great. The FreeSB update, I think sort of indicates opportunities to improve. Because at the end of the day, if you have a perception that the only place you're ever going to be able to use this is on Solaris variants or OS X, from a sort of standard developer standpoint, that's not going to be enough to get them interested. Because we obsess around technology.
It's like it only runs on the computer you happen to be using right now for essentially every developer on the planet.
Well,
actually, my software is actually
sure, and we need to solve that problem. But I guess I wonder. To me, I don't think we're using the existing beachhead enough. I agree with you. Obviously, Linux 4 is great, and we want to encourage that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah, Mark.
So I'm actually super new to DTrace, right? I literally did not use it until probably a year ago. So I spent 15 years ago I was on AIX. For the last 10 years I've been working on Linux, and I came to it a year ago. And the number one problem I had by far was that I don't know how Solaris works. And every example is largely geared towards you understand the kernel and the descript thing, the sugar, it's awk. It's not hard, right? I got that literally in about an hour, and it was just a matter of I don't know what to go DTrace now. I have no idea what I should go right. All I know is here's this overwhelming amount of information that clearly if I was a smarter man, I would get everything I ever want from, but I can't. And it took a long time to eventually what really sold it on me is getting the things out of the upstack, right? So seeing BDB was probably the first one I used that I got it out of, detracing user level applications that were meaningful to me. And those are on Mac OS X, right? They don't, I totally buy yeah, it needs to be on Linux, but they're already there. Getting Postgres, MySQL, all that kind of stuff, sort of elevated to examples of descripts for things that the average developer is using.
So I think one of the problems here is outside of this room, maybe there's not a great appreciation of how much of a base knowledge is required to actually utilize DTrace extremely well. Mm-hmm. So that is the ancillary knowledge that's necessary. That is understanding of a kernel, understanding of the way the kernel fits together, understanding of the way the application ties to the kernel. And the two things I would say that in my experience have introduced more people to DTrace and open doors to actually get people to use DTrace are both visualization tools. And the one I've seen massive take up on is instruments on the Apple platform. And that's not because it's done anything other than instrumentation fundamentally of the application space. It reaches into the kernel obviously, but seeing people use that, seeing Apple developers use that, and then say, how the hell did they get this much information? Oh, well, it's DTrace. What the hell's DTrace? I can show you DTrace. It's a couple of lines of code. And from that point, every Apple developer has just switched and used it that I've met. And the other one, fundamentally from a Sun background, is the analytics code that was present in Fishworks. I convinced so many companies when I worked for consultancy to actually switch across and utilize DTrace because they didn't have to understand DTrace. They didn't know DTrace was actually providing that code. You sit down 5 minutes with a demonstration live on a production system using analytics and a Fishworks interface, and it convinced people there and then. And that immediately started the conversation rolling as to where do we go? How do we get this sort of insight into the rest of our platform? The added advantage, of course, for the analytics platform in Fishworks is the fact that you were showing them something on an independent platform because you were detracing storage traffic that was moving back and forth, irrespective of where the client traffic originated from. So it didn't matter whether it was a Solaris box. Solaris was taken out of the picture. Nobody gave a damn what the platform was. It was just, this is the sort of insight you should be requesting.
can we get this insight? Yes, we can. Here's the code that actually does it for you.
Well, and that's, I was just going to say, I mean, I think one of the things that we've seen certainly improve the sort of adoption and visibility of other languages are packages.
Yes.
Right? Packages for defined scripts, packages for discrete functions.
Well,
anybody, I mean, how many people in the room use R? You guys use it? All right, so not a ton. So, you know, R has literally a package for pretty much anything you want to do.
Yeah.
Right? You don't need to know anything really about the language. You know, for example, if you want to use R to analyze finances, right? There's a package, what is it, QuantMod, I think, or QuantCast. And basically, it will rip down everything you need, and the functions are pretty discrete. And you can read, you know, the man page is a couple pages long, and you're set. Now, that model obviously doesn't work when we're talking about debugging sort of distinct user applications and so on. But, you know, there have to be analogs to say, all right, you know, I'm going to be operating, for example, around, you know, discrete components that are known, you know, Postgres, MySQL, whatever. You know, what are the, you know, how do we package these things up into scripts where somebody can come in, not know DTrace intimately, not know scripting intimately, but can download a package and operate within a much more constrained set of functions and be productive and get an idea of what's going on without sort of that sort of upfront learning curve of I have to know everything that's going on and know where things are in the system.
So I mean, I think that what sort of Mark has done with the Node Restify is a huge work in the right direction, because to use the Restify pros, I don't really have to know that much about the system. Now, regrettably, like that's where you get into the copying issue, and maybe I guess I would be curious, like, what do we need to do to get more Node developers using Restify on the Mac? Like, let's neutralize the platform argument for the moment.
Honestly, I don't think like copying is a thing, but like you hit it once, okay, bad dog, don't do that. Right? The shot color treatment works. I mean, I think it really, to me, really, it comes down to more. DTrace needs to be in the things that people are actually using, right? And like your point about developers versus not having root privileges versus system administrators, like probably neither one of those understand the kernel interactions at all, right? I mean, I would just wager from a lot of these companies they probably don't understand a lot of that stuff.
So I think we're missing a whole other vector here. And if you think about what how whether it was Linux or Java or so many other things came up, right, and became popular. A lot of this came out in academia, right? Coursework, people doing it, teaching it. If you want to think about an operating systems course, right? You're trying to teach systems internals and how stuff works. What better tool to understand what an operating system is doing than to go actually live and look at it with a tool like DTrace?
But I think you're missing the broader community, right? I mean, there's so over on the left side of the room has been pretty heavy all of a sudden. And we've got one that says the language is not the barrier, another that says the visualization is the problem, and another that says having all the stuff packaged together in a DTrace toolkit, super duper, would do it. And the question is it all three, right? The visualization issue, it's like, don't we have Chime and NetBeans did some visualization with DTrace and Java, and it still wasn't picked up, right? So that's the complexities. Every time you try to say, okay, I'm going to do something, we did training. I mean, I have no idea how many classes we did trying to teach the DTrace language, and you go back to the same company a year later, and of the people that were in the class, 0 had used DTrace since then. It was too difficult, and I can't explain why that is. But it does happen. So this is the thing that's been very frustrating for me is to try to figure out what it is, and every time, and all of these I've thought about, and every time you try to address any of them, you still end up in the same place. But I do think that the one thing we've got to do is more so than kernel developers, where obviously this was designed by kernel developers originally and was used by kernel developers originally. The developer community at large, right, is going to be a little bit. Is really what we want to target. People that are doing Java development or Node.js or anything else. So how do we do that? Is the question.
So I'm curious, like after you trained these people at a company and then they hadn't used it a year later, was that because they didn't understand how to use DTrace, or because they couldn't because they needed to get permission from the system administrator who wouldn't give it to them? So
in the realm of possible answers from that is probably the highest on the list is I couldn't get permission to do it. But then when you all say the system administrators in the room, it's I didn't know when to use it. And then the third was probably when I did use it, I didn't understand what I saw.
So it seems like the types of posts that Brendan's are doing have been quite useful in terms of I have a specific problem and I want to solve it. So I think we need to try to get is the mentality aligned such that if I have a problem, I know how to ask a question, and I know that this tool will answer the question. Regardless of whether I know how to use the tool, that becomes kind of secondary, because it's pretty easy to pick up when you have a very specific question. So for your sysadmins to be able to point to just, instead of the recipe you mentioned before, just like the UStack recipes. Like I don't necessarily know what the UStack, histogram is, or the deploy all the stuff down the bottom, but I know that if I give this to a developer, he'll go fix it.
I think one of the greatest assets that this community has had in the last couple of years, and he's in the room, so I'll say it, is the book, the DTrace book that Brendan now has. If I'd had that when I was trying to teach people how to use DTrace, I'd fucking converted hundreds to more people than I have done. Because frankly, the fact that it's practical, it's pragmatic, it speaks to problems that they see day in, day out. It's a fantastic introduction, and it's a great starting point, and it's a great pattern to actually start from the book and actually work your way through. If that had been available, the DTrace toolkit was fantastic. It was a good starting point, but it really didn't touch on all of the different areas that the book does. The book is so comprehensive in terms of coverage of an operating system.
And heavy.
But flies well.
It's a fantastic concept. It makes a great starting point. I think from the book you'll be able to convert a huge number of people.
Well, and like one of the most telling things for me is that Oracle, even from their support channel, hardly ever does anything that requires, hey, go run this DTrace script for me. Very rare to see that, and even the GUDS collection script that they have still has almost zero DTrace in it.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's interesting. So it's not, it would be nice if it was almost being forced upon people. Like, DTrace is about to run on your machine.
It's their personnel I was training, so I can tell you how many of them that they actually have.
Exactly.
And I can count on
And I did the same thing back when it was Sun. I trained a tremendous number of them, and most people still never used it. Yeah, Brendan.
So it's something that might be interesting. On my blog, the two most popular blog posts I've done to date, number one is the top 10 DTrace scripts on Mac OS X, which has had over 60,000 views. Number two is 2000X performance win, which used DTrace on grep, which has had about 40,000 views. And I've been very bad about quantifying performance wins and providing case studies. And I have people tell me afterwards, it would have been great if you mentioned the customer name and if you mentioned the performance win. It's something that I know I haven't done enough of myself, but maybe that's a vector for helping people.
And I would love to do that, but being a consultant, I'm kind of, I've got this nice little piece of paper that says I can't do that.
So we've only got 3 minutes, but there are a bunch of people that haven't said anything that have got their hands up that I want to get to quickly. So,
so as a developer, I think developers will learn something if it's proven that they have something. If you give them the hook and you say, "Wow, this is really helpful to me. How do I learn more?" And particularly, there's so much that people, I myself and people on my team have learned from forums and things like that. I wouldn't even know to look for a DTrace forum, but I say I have a problem. How do I solve it? And I get to Stack Overflow and things like that. Are there example scripts that are hey, I solved this problem, get it into various things that will wind up getting to just random search results so that people will say, oh, I have this random MySQL problem, boom, here's an example script that solves it. Then someone will cut and paste that into a terminal, compile it, run it, they'll solve their individual problem and say, how do I learn more? Is that a venue?
So are contrived examples useful in that? Because again, I can't personally. Because I just I know it's kind of.
It's like Stack Overflow. If I do MySQL performance problem and I Google that and I get to a Stack Overflow where the top answer is DTrace script, that would be huge. But I guess we should engage in SEO, which I'm happy to engage in. I think it's a little bit of a bootstrap problem. But I think we do need. I think that the fact that Brendan's two most popular blog entries, I think that's interesting to me. And particularly on the content, we need to be doing more and using, because maybe we can show how to use that on your laptop, right? And
I think some of that is just that the two entries that he's talking about, especially the second one, which happens to be directly related to work that we all did together. It's because it was a business problem. And a lot of the stuff we're talking about here as people who are fairly low-level engineers is it's not academic, but to a business. I'm not primarily a developer at all at ModCloth. I sort of run the operations team. So I'm one of the few people in maybe one of the few people in this room that has to think more about business stuff some days than I think about technical stuff. And I think if we don't give people a reason to see dtrace in that context, then there's not going to be a lot of adoption. Because at the end of the day, your boss is saying, I need these things delivered by this time. And if you say, well, I didn't do it because I was learning dtrace, you have to have like an answer for that.
Can I ask a quick question and to Brendan? In the dtrace toolkit, which people have referenced quite a bit, and some of us have used like various things, how many of those scripts are geared towards or utilize a PID provider?
The PID provider. Oh.
Because we've talked about how the PID provider is 70% of usefulness is the PID provider, which I think for developers, that's the key point.
I think,
right.
but yeah, there's not a dtrace toolkit aimed at developers upstack.
Right, exactly.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, it is mostly system.
What
it's
people
mostly
know
system.
is they know the dtrace toolkit, which is primarily for systems people, and developers are, they're going to stop at the library, and if they're lucky, maybe they go further.
Well, I mean, that's the point of the dtrace toolkit. I was teaching system administrators at the time, and I created scripts that looked familiar. So they had you ran them with -h, they were wrapped in a shell, so they looked like a /user bin, user bin, whatever command for that system administrator audience. And you're right, it's not for the developer.
Yeah, I think that's the gap we've kind of missed as a community, is that it's obviously more difficult to actually come up with generic, scripts that go towards applications. But if people that are going to be in a development environment, that might be what they really need. And you could say, hey, run this against your application, and it traces like all the various library calls. And
Well, take that a step further and build it like into Eclipse or something, right? Yeah. To where build, run, dtrace script, click down, so it's more familiar to them.
Yeah,
one question for
one of the things I had is like, there's no Eclipse plugin. I mean, the entire world uses Eclipse. It's like an operating system. And there's no plugin for Eclipse, which I found to be very strange. So I feel
well, another question for people who are sort of like, pushing these into Node and Ruby and Rails and all that, like, once you get that pushed upstream, are you pushing a set of scripts, a set of tools, a set of things to go with it? So when I download the source code, there's like, demo
if you go to Node Restify, for example, the dtrace probes are a big feature of Node Restify, and if you go to Node Restify, Mark does feature very prominently, like here are 5 scripts that you can use to, and I think if we could do that same thing, Node Restify is great, but it's got a smaller community. If we could do that same thing for Rails, I do think that it's going to.
So if you can drive adoption for that as well, then the other thing that you can do, which is really interesting to Eric's point, is that you can actually integrate scripts that actually are integrated into a CI environment, so that you can actually use them for a test-driven development as well. You can look at them as an integration test. So you can look at every time we integrate code, we rerun these. dtrace gives us the analysis to actually go through this and tell us where the improvements were, where the losses were, and that's a significant benefit as far as testing is concerned.
Yeah, we've had many discussions at Microsoft about possibly including performance testing in continuous integration, and we usually end up saying we don't want to do that because the tests would be too amorphous.
Yeah, too amorphous, too intensive, too difficult for us to actually assess. If the probing's already there in Node, then it's very trivial to actually turn around and say, hey, between these 2 releases, we've got a 5% delta. We've improved the code this much. If you give that kind of feedback, then that's a fantastic benefit you can't get anywhere else.
So we need to clear out of here. So we actually need to go drinking. So I just want to say before we clear out of here, and I know that it's jammed to do this in one day, but I think better an action-packed one day than a boring 2 or 3. So thank you very much. Thank you, Deirdre, again, huge. Thanks to all of you. I know we're spending a lot of time talking about the great unwashed, but personally, I love my day with the cleansed here. I hold all of you in such high regard. I think we hold one another in high regard. So thank you so much for making the time to come here. And let's go drinking and get some more stories.
And Alex Salkever of the Giant Cloud had to run and get the beer at the last minute due to a mix-up. So please be very nice to him and say thank you.
We have beer or not?
We have beer.
Okay. Yeah. You give me the executive.
We're not going to get beer. This is mine. I need to unplug it from down there.